Thank you, everyone, for coming today. We are here to talk about data science, and how it operates potentially with the core facilities that we have on our campuses. I think for a little bit of near-term context, I think Dr. Short is it Shorte? Had an excellent question during the plenary, which was, how does data fit into all of this, and what obstacles are there in terms of our discovery? Sometimes because represented in these conferences is not necessarily people who are explicitly doing data science and AI and other sorts of activities. And so we hope to speak a little bit to that. My name, introduce myself, and then the panelists will introduce themselves as well, is James Wilgenbusch. I go by Jim typically. And this community is not one that I typically sort of am embedded in. And so I'm normally at supercomputing and events like PERC, where we're really talking about data, compute, and the cyber infrastructure around it for doing computations. And so I was invited to bring together this panelist, many of whom also, I would say both of whom are more sort of embedded in the computing side of things. And so we're going to offer that perspective. As far as sort of housekeeping, we're asked to sort of give some updates, namely that we're fine if you want to take pictures of anything that you see on the screen. So that works great for us. We ask that if you have questions, that you feel free, if those questions especially are sort of clarifying questions, that you ask those at any point during the talks that we're going to give, or the introduction. And then we've specifically reserved time at the end where we hope to have a lively discussion in terms of not just our experience, but also maybe bring in some of your experiences. Of course, we hope that everyone here has read the ABRF Code of Conduct and abides by that, and we look forward to a civil and enlightening conversation. All right, so with that, I'm going to kick off, and then each of us are going to give sort of a general view of where we're coming from, who we are, where we're coming from, and then we're going to open it up to more of like a panel-style discussion. All right, so I mentioned my name. Now I will tell you just a little bit about where I come from. So I come from here. I'm at the University of Minnesota. If you get a chance, it is just across the river, and I direct an organization called Research Computing. I report to the Vice President for Research, and we have about, underneath Research Computing, almost 100 staff now, most of whom are what we call research scientists. And one of the centers that's been around longest is the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute, which has been around since 1981 in some form. In addition to the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute, we also have an organization called USpatial, and that organization deals typically with geospatial data, as the name somewhat implies. We also have a data science initiative, and that's a relatively new initiative at the University of Minnesota. We have the institute underneath my research computing purview is also the International Institute for Biosensing, and then most recently we started a program called Sustainable Geocommunities. And so a fairly wide purview, providing services integrated in various ways into our core facilities. So to provide a little bit of context for this, the world that I come from is one in which we have this notion of instruments here on the left-hand side of the screen, or maybe data repositories. These aren't always instruments, but maybe they're large data repositories that are in some cases housed at universities, or sometimes housed as large-scale sort of national resources. And then we have on the other side the hope of discovery, right, and data sharing or sharing of some sort. In the middle is what NSF has termed the missing middle. And that's where challenges associated with taking those data coming from repositories or instruments or what have you is faced. Some of these challenges or opportunities include data access, discovering these various forms of data, and then of course making these data interoperable. Given that they're coming from many different sources, often that's a tremendous challenge. That's the space that I operate in, is sort of making that connection, and you'll hear more from our panelists in terms of where they operate. And so bringing that sort of view of the national ecosystem a little bit closer to home, at the University of Minnesota we have this similar concept, right? On the left we have data repositories, we have core facilities, our genomics centers, proteomics and so forth. On the right-hand side, we have all those things that we love to do as universities, and that is share our discoveries, share our data in some cases. But in the middle, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that thing that NSF has called the missing middle? And we primarily do this by having these various entities that are really honed into moving data, analyzing data, and sharing data in ways that our faculty and the various talent that we have, not just at the University of Minnesota, but obviously our broader partner networks can have better access. And some of the sort of core ingredients associated with those are things like shared governance. These can actually be sort of huge challenges when it comes to making things work well. I'm not going to get heavily into those, but I would love to hear people's ideas as far as that key ingredient is concerned. Coordinated infrastructure. You can see already up on this slide that I've listed not just one sort of technology provider, but multiple technology providers, right? So I sit alongside what we often refer to as our central IT organization, but I'm not part of it. I report up through the Vice President for Research. And our scope, our focus is usually compute and data storage research instrumentation. I don't take care of the network though, for example, and there are other storage platforms often where research data resides. So it's really important that we recognize that there's a coordination effort needed in terms of the technology that undergirds this challenge. Common processes, this is key, I think, to making this workflow environment successful, and bringing in diverse sets of experience. And so these are what I would consider to be sort of key elements to successfully implementing workflows at various scales. And again, you're going to hear different perspectives on how that actually might be carried out. Why does it matter? I probably don't need to tell this group why it matters, but it's important to remind ourselves that we're really solving important problems. At the University of Minnesota, we have a huge agricultural component. My background is not in agriculture. My background is more in bioinformatics, but obviously bioinformatics can play an important role in that. I've found myself at conferences like legume conferences talking about data integration and thinking, this is not where I expected to be. But it's important, feeding the world. How do we look at materials, and how do those materials affect various things that we're involved in is key to what we're doing in terms of these workflows. Of course, diagnosing various types of disease and addressing issues concerning epidemics and drug addiction and so forth are a few of the examples that we have developed fairly extensive pipelines for. So the important questions that we have shouldn't be overlooked. We also deal with the entire community now. Back in the day, supercomputing was typically restricted to the physical domains, And in some ways that made things easier. But now things have grown a great deal, and we have people from all over life sciences, the humanities, and so forth that we're working with. And it actually makes my job extremely exciting, but it also makes it more challenging, crossing those sort of cultural differences, learning new languages in terms of the way we talk about science. I'm going to segue a little bit into one of these challenges that we can't overlook, and that is how do we ensure that the data that we're entrusted with are also safe from the standpoint of concerns regarding privacy. And so this is a real look at what departments we're actually dealing with where data sensitivity regarding human subjects is a key priority. And so addressing some of those issues is essential, but it's also a challenge in terms of actually making things work in a seamless, frictionless sort of way. Some compliance areas that I just want to sort of draw to the top and that people are familiar with, but this is mainly meant for framing, include health and human subjects. I'm separately sort of putting data use agreements up there, and you'll see why in a moment. Controlled and unclassified information, not just specific to defense-related activities, but also increasingly those labels are now applied to other forms of data. So these are sort of the big categories that we look at, and again, those are nuanced, right? So when you get into health information, you could see things that are protected by numerous types of legislation, like HIPAA is probably the one that you're most familiar with, but we can also think about running CLIA certified pipelines. Some people may have had experience doing that. When we talk about data use agreements, that begins to span all different disciplines, not only those within the health area, but also within other jurisdictions. So European law often requires us to sign data use agreements as well. And then University of Minnesota, like many of the universities that you represent, have an increasing number of public-private partnerships. And so there's a sort of a cottage industry of bespoke data use agreements that we often have to go through and ensure that we're satisfying in some way. And I don't see an immediate end to that, but that is one of the challenges that we face in this space. And then finally, controlled unclassified information. At the university level, there's increasing pressure to be certified using the new cybersecurity maturity model for certification. And that has been evolving and changing in various ways, but I think we're all sort of facing the fact that we will have to have this external certification at some point for dealing with controlled unclassified information. So what does this look like? How do we actually navigate these things at a university level? This is actually the number of offices. These points are offices that deal in some way with compliance. And so it's a complicated drawing, and you can imagine as a faculty member who is interested in doing work that might have some privacy components associated with it, it's difficult to navigate this. And so we've been working really the last 3 years in a very focused manner to try to simplify this, at least from the perspective of researchers who are operating in this space. One of the ways that we've done this is we've recognized that there's sort of a missing middle. There's a missing middle, not just in terms of the two spectra that I showed earlier, but in terms of governance in general. And so we started something called the Institutional Cyber Infrastructure Group. And that group is really there to try to coordinate these activities from a governance standpoint. And typically the members of this organization, well, the members of this organization are reporting directly to vice presidents of various areas. For example, the provost, the vice president for research, or the CIO. Within our university, those are all sort of separate silos. And so we have a working group. We meet actually weekly to triage issues. And really top of our list is how do we deal with these issues related to compliance and bring some simplicity to it so that that's not a major obstacle in terms of getting work done across the first slide that I showed you, from instrumentation to discovery and sharing. So we given that this is a group that includes different organizations, the work is actually decided at that point at like what actual group is going to be doing the work. Teams and purposes are defined at our level, and then the work again is executed within each of the functional areas. And so this has again been something we've been refining over the last 3 to 4 years, and we have a couple of papers actually on how that works, which I'm happy to provide if you have more questions about it. Why is it important? Because people will get stuff done, whether it's done elegantly or not so eloquently. And so the next two panelists are going to get a little bit deeper into the weeds and describe some of the ways that it could be done more eloquently. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over. I think, Thomas, you're next.
All right, so let's see. So this is about a few of the things that we're doing on campus to help kind of fill that gap. And I'm also at the Supercomputing Institute. My journey has been from doing microscopy, then working in always on the analysis side, or mostly in the analysis side, then working in a core facility. Then I moved here to the States, still in a core facility, and then kind of roped in more and more into the computational side of things. And now I co-direct with Christy Hensler, the research informatics group at the Supercomputing Institute. So our job is really to kind of help researchers think about their flow of data, from acquisition to retirement. Yeah, so that's a bit about the introduction, but my background is in image analysis. That's kind of my bias, and you'll see some of it in these slides. First of all, to thank Rachel Benson from MSI, has been doing a lot of the coding and thinking about the details of what I'm going to show. But at MSI, also the advanced system operations, James Young from the Department of Neuroscience, working on the coding some of the one of the workflows I'm going to show. UIC staff have been working very closely. They're representative here. Grant, right there. Not to put you on the spot, but right there. Great people. And John Garby from UMGC, the Genomics Center, and Carlos Soria from CMRR. Okay, so basically, what are the challenges? There's an increased pressure on core facility as the scope of the work it gets constantly pushed into data management. As a core facility, I think the cool thing is that we have these shared instruments. That's kind of the greatest value that that a core facility can bring. But then more and more, as a researcher, you come to the core facility, take images if you're in an imaging facility, and kind of expect that someone is going to take care of those images, and I can just acquire them, keep them there, and they'll live on forever, within the core facility. So, but in fact, by policy, often the researcher is the steward of that data. So they are kind of responsible for making sure that that data is, managed accordingly. So there's a bit of this disconnect, and core facilities are kind of stuck in the middle from that point of view. So So on the other side, these data sets and the complexity of the analysis are increasing, and so it's more and more frequent that you have analysis or type of analysis that require resources that go beyond what is available in a single lab or in a single core facility. And so there's more and more need of kind of thinking about this data lifecycle comprehensively. So at the Supercomputing Institute, the goal was to try and think about this and see how to support that. And so in particular for core facilities, recognizing that a lot of the data needs some kind of, especially like if you think about genomics, now it's being more and more kind of streamlined. They have to go through some, it's not enough to get the sequencing data, but you need to mapping, trimming, and all sorts of things that need some computation. And often the workflows are more kind of standardizable. But it's not only genomics. I mean, if you think about imaging, the size of the images that these instruments are creating are getting larger and larger. So in terms of storing, at least, the MSI is kind of facilitating that by providing a space embedded in a place where you can actually do computation, and helping the core facilities kind of onboard the very instruments so that the data can go from the instrument directly inside the compute area. So not only the space, as I said, but also kind of helping that transition. During that free tier, at any time, researchers can always pull the data into the space that they already have access to, but it kind of has to be kind of an intentional step of thinking about which data sets are the ones that you want to keep and which ones are not. If you look at a bit of the details, how does it look like if you log into MSI and you get data from a core facility? That's where it would appear. So you have a directory in your group directory. There's a data delivery, and you will see all of the data there. It's organized by quarter because the data lifecycle scripts kind of work on a quarterly basis. And the ownership is of a service account, basically an account that is used for automation. And the group has only read permissions. The idea is that we want to minimize, unintentional, deletion or modification of data that comes from the core facilities. So you get the data, be able to copy it or do whatever you need to do, and the ingestion can happen either automatically. So some of the instruments have automated workflows. Data is acquired, it goes there, and then suddenly it pops into the directory automatically. Some of them, especially for some of the larger imaging use cases, that needs some additional pre-processing or there's a staging phase, and then the data is delivered manually, so to speak. And the third element is that automatic data lifecycle management. So one of the challenges is that data sets are getting larger. This was a search I did now a couple of years ago, and I tried to repeat it, but the tool that gave me this didn't work anymore. So you're stuck with a 2-year-old graph, but you can see the trends, and I think the trends are kind of clear. If you search for gigabytes and terabytes and petabytes and exabytes into PubMed, you pop up with a number of citations that increase during the year, and interestingly, exabytes is non-zero. So I haven't dived into those to see what those are. But it's clear that data sets are getting larger. So with that, the classic paradigm users are familiar with, so that you have some shared storage, you just put it there, pick any analysis or laptop, and can do the analysis on that, and then put it back into the shared spool. Doesn't necessarily work for these larger data sets. With large data sets, very few storage solutions are really appropriate, especially if you think about the hundreds of gigabytes of data. because then you have to think about data transfer, and that becomes impractical at some point. Now, this, let's see if this works. That'd be interesting. It was a video link, and of course it was on Google Slides, so I guess, let's see if this works.
Click it, it brings up a web browser.
Oh, cool. Maybe. Doesn't matter. It was just a fancy picture of, well, fancy. I say it's fancy. It was a rotating brain from our mouse. Oh, there it is. You can see a picture of it. Imagine it rotating and zooming in. And you see larger. This is about a terabyte in size, right? So that's a kind of, the reason I bring it up here is like an example of an image which is large and has some data management problems. So a few things that come up as part of this is how do we think about larger data sets? Well, one is don't move the data in the sense once it's acquired you can think of it of putting it in one place and just keeping it there. And so at that point you have to think about solutions for visualization. If you have like a 1 micron resolution image of something which is a few centimeters in size, you can quickly see how it's impossible for any screen to show all of the detail. And so you have these pyramidal data formats which have kind of like Google Maps if you think of it. So you have kind of zoomed out versions of the same data set so that when you open it up you will see the entire brain, but then you can zoom in and get additional detail. And so it only loads the resolution it needs as you kind of zoom in or need additional detail. Well, I mean, this is obvious, but the thing is that then you can start doing things like being strategic about what resolution level you want to use. So if you think about a clear mouse brain and you want to kind of chop it up into different regions that have been identified by an atlas, for example, the Allen Brain Atlas is the one that we usually typically use. If you want to do registration, the atlas is at 25 microns. Well, one of the atlases is at 25 microns per pixel resolution. So there's no point in doing the registration with your image at 1 micron resolution because it's going to take a long time and not give you additional detail. Again, if you're looking at individual cell counting, you can see how no point in going below maybe 2 microns per pixel, and at that point you can have data sets that you can just bring in the data that you actually need for processing. And the other one is to really think about the data life cycle at the moment that you're designing your experiment. That's not trivial. One of the interesting new paradigms, which I'm kind of excited about, seeing how far it gets pushed, is this idea of kind of serverless visualization. So if you're familiar with object storage, it's kind of like AWS S3-based protocols. There are a number of vendors now who offer the same protocol access. And the good thing is it's very scalable and relatively low cost with respect to other kinds of storage. And the interesting thing is that it can be leveraged to create basically a browser-based code. So it's basically code that runs directly in your browser, but accesses the data directly from the object storage. So you can think of it as having, the data on the server doesn't move, and your browser is doing all of the hard work of picking up the correct pieces of the data. And let's see if this works. I'm just going to show you an example of a data set here that uses this technology. This is NeuroGlancer. This is one example of these browser-based technologies.
I think it's because it's projecting.
Okay, let me see if I can switch to something. Let me try something live and see. duplicate slideshow, maybe this one. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Lucky guess. Okay, so this is an example of one of these technologies, and so it's called NeuroGlancer, and they had this this giant, about a petabyte of data, I think, and so the idea is that you have the data sitting in object storage, but if you kind of zoom in, you get more and more detail. But all of the visualization and all of the nice things are kind of living in your browser. There's nothing in between your browser and the actual storage. And then, you can integrate things like visualizing, also kind of 3D mesh-based objects. And you can imagine that this has a lot of potential because at that point, it's inherently scalable in the sense that if you have 100 people that are looking at this, you don't have to worry about scaling the middle level in between the user and the object. You just have to make sure that the storage is able to support that network traffic, which if you're just looking at data, it's not going to be huge. So, and the thing is that this visualizer, you can kind of change this URL here and point it to an object storage, and you would be basically just looking at a different data set. Anyways, so this is, to me, as an interesting example of a technology that is designed with that large data set use case in mind. An example of where we are trying to put everything together is for this whole clear mouse brain imaging. And some of the things that we apply are some AI-based denoising, registration, state-of-the-art neuroimaging, and advanced normalization tools. If you work with neuroimaging data, you might have heard of that. Cell counting, it's using, again, AI-based cell finder. And then vessel segmentation is using trail map. So it's kind of piecing together various different parts. You can see the different, well, you can't see, but I'm telling you that these are the different branches of different paths that the data goes through. And then each one of those generates some data. It could be a table, which usually is a table, of, for example, the parcellations, a labeled image. The cell counting would be the coordinates of the cells it finds, and trail map would be, again, another mask. And so you can take all of these and put all of this information together. And at that point, you can combine it and have statistics per region on cells, for example. How many cells do I have in this particular region? What is the, for example, what's the distribution of distances to the closest vessel that you might find on a per region basis? And the other thing is how do you visualize all of this information? Because it's good to have a table, but it's even better if you can show a picture that kind of visualizes the same information. And so we're piping that into using we're kind of using Amaris for now because that's the format that well, Amaris has its HDF5 based format, which is, it's open, so you can actually write data in HDF5 format. It's pyramidal, so it's good for visualizing. But it kind of is still in that old, kind of non-object-based storage. We're kind of moving towards a pipeline that includes some of the more recent advances like OMIZAR, the next generation file format by OME. And but the idea is to export all of that in a way that the user can then examine. So currently the data is pushed to MSI, denoising, registration, cell counting, vessel segmentation, I should say. And then at that point you can deliver the results to the group. And as I said, what I would really like to add to that is the ability of having some of this serverless visualization, which would be, it's this close, but it's not quite there yet. and also migrate a lot of that to MSI. Previously, how we were doing this, well, we had a couple of powerful workstations with a lot of memory, and then doing the processing on these workstations and then kind of pushing and pulling the data to shared storage space. Anyway, so other things that are going on are the core facilities. This was kind of more the imaging case. But for the Genomic Center, it's more established. There's a flow of data coming from the genomic facilities and processed as part of the as part of the standard workflow. So it was also the first use case that MSI supported, and we also worked with the Center for Magnetic Resonance Resource, and especially for neuroimaging, it's also important to have access to these larger computations, especially if you're analyzing many of these neuroimaging data sets. Typically, the standard pipelines take about 24 hours on a semi-powerful supercomputing node, so you can think of how that can quickly scale up. And also, this helped CMRR move away from spending time and resources on creating their own local clusters for storage and computing, which especially were not particularly in their business for external user. It's so they can focus basically on using those for more local research applications. Yep. So that's all I had for today, and I'll leave it for Rafael to take the next one.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Nice talks and great introduction, so it makes my life a little bit easier. I come completely from a different background. I'm a computer scientist, so if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me and ask, because I can come up with a lot of CS jargons. So please don't be afraid of saying, hey, I can't understand anything you're saying. And also have an accent, so it doesn't help too. A little bit of background on myself. I'm a workflows person. I've been working with workflows since 2010, so it has been 14 years already, quite a while. I spent a long time in academia, about 9 years. And then, as people say in academia, I decided to move to the dark side, that is DOE. So now I'm in the DOE lab, Oak Ridge National Lab. If you don't know, it's located in Knoxville, close to Knoxville, Tennessee, specifically Oak Ridge. If you want to learn more, watch Oppenheimer, and you're going to, get to understand what we do there. Just joking. So I'm specifically at the OLCF, that is the Oak Ridge Leadership Computing Facility, that hosts the Frontier supercomputer, the first one to exascale. So we are very excited about that. And we work with basically every single researcher in the US. So all different domains. We work with people from DOE, of course, but we also have working with universities, NIH, NOAA, Air Force, and VA, and everything else that you can imagine that might need computing. So we are very open to that. In addition to this, one thing that I don't have on this slide, but also I have at the end of my talk, I'm also the director of the Workflows Community Initiative, that I'm going to talk a little bit more if you are interested to learn about workflows. And by the way, I tend to talk a lot, so please control me on time. So workflows, I'm bringing a little bit of fundamental definitions here of scientific workflows and what it means, not only the business workflow itself, but the scientific one that people use in everyday research. Some people call scientific, some people call research workflows, and for short, we call workflows that can involve everything. So I added this word in the beginning that I call traditional scientific workflows that has been around for about 25 years now. And the idea is, you have some computation you wanted to do, you have a bunch of different steps in sequences, and then, typically what you would do, an SSH to a terminal, into a computer, a cluster or something, and then you start writing your own scripts that you have to learn, and you say, I'm not a computer scientist, but I have to learn this thing. It's annoying. And then you put things together, and you run one job, a task on that cluster, you get a result, you look at that, then you run the next thing, and then you run the next thing. And at the end, you have a sequence of activities that you want to do. And this is basically what we call workflows in this point. Why do I call traditional here? Because for about 25 years and up to today, these things still work like that, okay? And the idea is how we can automate all of these steps. And you don't need to be doing everything, manually yourself. The idea is you define, as a scientist, you come and define and say, this is what I want to do. These are the programs I want to use, this is my input data, these are the parameters, figure it out. And the workflow management systems are supposed to take it into account and then, automate everything for you. And you just wait and beautifully you get the results. It's not even, not always like that, but that's the goal. And of course you have these dependencies and you define the structure, that we call in DAGs, direct cyclic graphs, that basically you tell them what's happening after each step. So these things have been important, right? Maybe you don't know, but for example, some Nobel Prize awards, used these workflow systems, like the gravitational waves, the Higgs boson, all of these discoveries, had workflow systems doing the analysis and executions of all the machines and the millions of jobs and tasks they have to compute. COVID-19, we are out of it. Maybe, yes, no, I don't know. You know better than me. But COVID-19 research, when everything happened, the pandemic was there, DOE with NSF and other NIH and other offices, they put together and say how we can combine efforts to enable research in COVID-19. Not only to find the vaccines, but also try to understand how the disease was spreading, or if people would be together creating models and so on. So workflows are behind all of these things. And probably in your life you have done some sort of workflow in your research too. But now this is what I call modern workflows. What are these modern workflows? Workflows, as Jim was saying in the beginning, everything now is about data. I think in the last 2 decades we spent a lot of time thinking about computing, how we make the machines better, how we create new GPUs, TPUs with the tensors, or everything is AI, all of these things now. But we are seeing data, as Thomas mentioned, is increasing. The size of data is huge. For example, we work with a project at Slack that is in California. So basically their new instrument, they have a laser instrument that it's gonna generate about 1 to 2 terabytes of data per second. And we have to, manage and process this data. And we're just talking about actual data, but we are not talking about something else that is called metadata. And it's even larger than the actual data, because you need to capture provenance of your data. Everybody talks about fair. The data has to be fair. Well, what it means to be fair. There is a lot of metadata associated to that. So how are we going to manage all of this? And, the beautiful of the word comes and say, well, we're going to solve all of these problems with AI. It's beautiful. Put there a model. It's going to figure out everything, get all our knowledge. Or you look at ChatGPT, you go there, ask for the things, it's going to generate everything for you and take care. It's not always like that. Of course, for us, when people come and say, yeah, I'm going to do an AI model, or I'm going to do some AI to steer my experiment, or help me, taking decisions, this is all beautiful. But for us that we are, taking care of these machines, these systems, you're basically telling us we cannot predict anymore how things are going to run or how large the things are. You're basically just going to say, here is a model. At the next minute, I might need half of your resources. Or in the next minute, I don't need it at all. Or the next minute, I have 10 terabytes of data coming because the AI decided to do it. So how do we manage that? If you look at these new kind of workflows, they are much more complex. There is a lot of interactions. There is human in the loop now, because the scientists want to be steering the execution and understanding what is happening during the execution, and at the end, they're gonna come and say, well, actually my instrument that I configured to run this way, based on this result, I'm gonna change completely. And now everything that you predicted how the network, the storage, everything would be used is not the same way anymore. So these are the kind of new workflows that we call that completely changed, the static aspect of the workflow that we could before say, oh, you defined your script, with all these dependencies, it's beautiful, I know exactly how to do it in the best way possible. Now I don't know anymore. Now we need to learn on the fly, and this is hard. There is another issue. When you talk about privacy preserving, there is a lot of data that cannot, just leave an instrument anymore. And you have computing attached to the instrument. This is what we call, edge computing. So you have, small clusters or a small DGX box from NVIDIA, close to your instrument that you can do some computation there. You might not have the power of a supercomputer or an HPC cluster, but how you combine these two? There is federated learning as a solution. Great, that you don't need to move the data, you can learn, you can do processing close to there, do the large processing at HPC, and small processing close into where the data cannot move. But then it comes all the privacy issues because there are attributes, data, some metadata you are exchanging. So how you can ensure the privacy of that? And then there is more like autonomous multi-scale. So you are integrating simulation, data generation, collection, training, and a lot of things, everything together, and it's so complicated. So this, for me, this is what I call the modern workflows. So trying to understand these modern workflows, the workflows community at that time, that it wasn't a community, was basically like a bunch of folks, that we sit together and said, well, we have been doing workflows for 20 years, and every single person developed their own system and said, my system is the best because it can do all of this. And typically, just to give an information, there is a website that we try to keep track of how many workflow systems have been developed up to today. And the last number I saw was 420 something. So which one is the best? We don't know. It depends. And how this always starts? It starts because you normally, you say me and all of us as researchers, we say, oh, there are these tools I could use, and yeah, but this tool doesn't do that. Let me implement this thing here. Or you start with your script that you developed to do your research, and say, oh, but actually my script now I could do this, and then I could do this other thing, and you start incrementing, your script, and then I said, actually this is a nice tool, and I can make it generic enough to work with everything else, and then you create a new workflow system. So not all 420 are still very active today, but I would say at least 30 to 40 are still under development and people use a lot. There are some that comes from the industry, some that comes from the research side. Things like, just to give an example, on the industry side, I don't know if you've ever heard about Airflow, MLflow. On the biology side, very famous one that now they are making money with that is Nextflow from Spain. There are open source ones, like SnakeMake, Parcel, FunkX. I can keep giving names to you. But anyway, so these folks, we sit together and said, we need to take care of these challenges. We need to look into these modern workflows and see how we're going to do it. We need to work together. So, it's impossible to make everybody work together. There is competition, looking for funding. But I said, well, at least we could write a paper that we could put, what are the challenges there and potential solutions. So we wrote this roadmap. I'm not going to read all of these. I'm happy to share these slides later. So basically the challenges, everybody said, hey, we need to have fair computational workflows. Yay! And what workflows involve? Involve data, yes. Involve software, yes. Involve hardware, yes. It involves also a bunch of dependencies, yes. So making fair computational workflows is not that simple. You're basically taking all kinds of fair things that exist and combining them together. So just for the fair data, it took, they're still talking about it. Fair software, they're still talking about it. Combining this together, good luck. I'm happy I'm not leading this. Someone that works with me to leading this, so it's a nightmare. AI workflows, as I mentioned to you, Exascale, we are talking about getting to the big machines. So how these workflows gonna be handled, just to give a lot of, one more piece of information, and stop me because I talk a lot, I told you. I did a test, like evaluating different workflow systems. And we had a machine called Summit before Frontier that it's not exascale, it's petascale. And we did a test and say, hey, if I have a workflow that has 100,000 tasks to run, that is not much. We can easily get workflows with millions of tasks. I just did a test, I created this workflow, fake workflow, that does nothing, computes nothing, generates and reads no data, okay? The time the workflow system, that is, I'm not gonna put the name, but it was the most optimized workflow system for HPC, took just to orchestrate the 100,000 tasks, it was close to 2 hours. Just doing orchestration of nothing. So just coordinating things. And when you think about exascale, it's even worse, okay, the situation. So we need to be thinking about these problems. APIs, everybody loves an API. Everybody wants to say, hey, I have a new API to do these things. Oh, I can use this thing. Of course, when you talk about workflows, what is the kind of API? I'm gonna talk a little bit more later about this. Training and education, well, I keep using a sentence from a colleague from Berkeley Lab that she said once, workflow tools are so hard to use that you need to ship a developer with the tool. It's the only way you can use it. And a community, that is something I'm gonna talk later too. So today, there are a lot of efforts. Some colleagues are creating these common execution motifs of what we call AI-coupled HPC workflows. So it's not only workflows anymore, but it's everything with AI. And then we start, I'm not gonna go too much into the details here, but I basically say there are different kinds of AIs that you could do with your workflow. Things today that are getting a lot of attention is what they call the digital twins. So you create, a digital twin of your instrument or something. So running an instrument is expensive. And sometimes as a researcher, you have limited time that you can use on that instrument. So if you can have a digital twin of that instrument that is faithful enough, to the actual system, you could do a lot of your research on the simulated side. And then when you say, okay, now I'm confident that I can use that instrument the best way, you get your time on the instrument and then you do your actual experiment. So this is also a lot of things that people are using AI is also how to steer the instrument. For example, that case that I mentioned to you that is generating terabytes data per second, what they do actually is the researcher has, if I'm not wrong, a window of 10 or 12 hours that they can use the instrument. And then during that time, in 12 hours, they cannot do all the experiments that they want to do. I'm not a specialist on laser things, but also they have to point a laser at some points precisely to get exactly what they're looking for. So the way they do is they start the experiment, normally. They do some, try and error, say, oh, I'm trying this, I'm trying this, I'm trying this. And then they get to a point and say, well, if I've got 12 hours and I didn't get my nice result, well, I have to wait to know my next allocation because someone else is going to use. So to accelerate that, what they want to do is use the instrument, generate a lot of data, send this data, not send, stream the data into the HPC center, that it's not being a file transfer anymore, it's real-time sending data. You get an AI model that is being trained with that data, that hopefully is fast enough to infer something, send information, stream information back to the instrument, and then start to align the instrument close to the expected result that the researcher wants. And all of this has to happen in real time. So imagine the amount of data. Of course, they're not transferring terabytes of data. It comes all the things about data reduction. So which data then they can reduce, what information is important to send, how they do the accuracy to make sure that the data is still accurate and valid to produce something that is useful and so on. So they keep this loop alive and they need to have the machine available for them. So Just the example I was telling you, this is what we call cross-facility workflows. That typically workflows would be, we develop our workflow, I go to my machine and run something. Now the workflows involve a machine, there is an instrument, one HPC system here, might involve cloud, might involve some edge computing there, might involve too many different things that it's not one facility anymore. It's a whole set of different resources on different facilities. And of course, there are technical difficulties to do it, but you know, I'm sure if the three of us sit, we can say, oh yeah, we have all the solutions for that. But it comes the hardest, I would say, the problem to solve all this situation here. Do you know what is the hardest problem? People. People cannot agree. Each facility, they have their own policies, they have their own software stack, they have their own things. And what happens is, you know, we spend more time talking and try to convince and try to put a smile and be nice to say, hey, we agree on something. And sometimes we manage to create a network connection between two facilities just to run one experiment, but this is not sustainable, okay? So because of that, DOE officially created this program in October last year, but we have been working on that for 3 years already, that it's called the Integrated Research Infrastructure. So DOE, if you are not used to that, has several different facilities. The computing ones are on the Scientific Computing Office, but they have, for example, the Biological Environmental Research Office that has JGI, I don't know if you've ever heard about, the Joint Genome Institute, it's another facility. They have the laser facilities on the physics, they have the fusion, and so on. So DOE said, beautiful, we produce a lot of science on these different facilities, but it's so hard to move anything from one facility to another, or you know, to move data, or to use resources across these facilities. So the idea of this program was, well, we're going to connect all of these, and you guys are going to have to work together to figure out how to make this happen. And this is exactly what we are doing right now, that we are connecting, you know, the researchers with, of course, there is a YesNet, that is the network behind that, connecting all the different HPC resources that we have on different computing facilities, and connecting the actual, what we call the research facilities that has the instruments. And one new thing that DOE said is, I don't know if you can see here on the left, when you say data management, they just invested $500 million into a new facility that it's called the High Performance Data Facility. And the idea with that is, this new facility is the one that is going to collect all the data and run all the data lifecycle, do data curation and everything related to data lifecycle. Of course, we're going to keep copies of the data everywhere, distribute and do a lot of things, but this new facility is the one that is responsible for doing all of this aggregation. So it's a joint project actually between the J Lab, the Jefferson Lab, and the Berkeley Lab. So they're going to work together to create this new facility. So as IRI, is the Integrated Research Infrastructure Program, we work, there is a blueprint architecture. Just want to say there are a few things we identified, and again, identifying things is easy. We said we have 3 different science patterns that we wanted to solve. First one, of course, everything is data integration, intensive, and so on, how we integrate different types of data. So HPDF is there to help us. How you do time sensitive. So the example I told you, you know, that you have the instruments streaming data into a facility and sending back. This is another case. And long-term campaigns, so things sometimes that has to run for a week, 2 weeks, or a month, you know, constantly how you ensure that the resources are always available. The practice areas are basically like how you realize that. So workflows is one of them, there is security, and so on. At Oak Ridge, we created what we call the Advanced Computing Ecosystem to address these IRI needs. So we are taking the test beds, our computing resources, looking into evaluations of new technologies like storage technologies, or how we can explore using the cloud to connect to HPC at this moment. On the framework foundations, we're looking into the data streaming because we rely a lot on Globus for file transfers, but on the streaming side, we don't have a good solution yet. We are developing facilities API, so this means that the idea is to have a single API across all DOE facilities So you can use the resources, access the resources the same way, so you don't need to be changing your code if you go to different facilities. Get an agreement on scheduling policies, not only scheduling, but also kind of policies too. So right now, these are the 5 science pilots that IRI is pushing us to drive our work, but the idea is, next fiscal year or the next, to be expanding and open to the entire community. And we work with an Intersect that is an internal Oak Ridge project that the idea is really to enable these common channels of communications across different facilities. Not going to go into detail here, just details of what kind of technology you have available there. I want to talk a little bit about the workflows community. So what we did here was, as I mentioned to you, we spent 20-something years doing workflows. People used to do the things on their own side. So last year, 2022, I decided to create this, what we call the Workflows Community Initiative, invited good friends, we created a structure. And the minimum we do, at least, is what we call the Workflows Community Summit. That is an online event that we try to do every year. Last year we couldn't, but we're going to organize one this year, probably end of June or July. It's open to anyone who wants to join. You can join the community. I didn't put the website, but it's simple. It's workflows.community. That's all. So in 2022, we organized this report, this summit. Up to now, most of the people attending are people developing technologies and people running facilities. But we would love to have more scientists joining, because we can develop technologies, but if nobody wants to use them, it's useless. Our time is useless. So we need you, to come and tell, hey, this is what we need. This is our problems. And what we do at the end is we generate these reports, and myself and the other friends, we send these reports to every single program manager we know, mostly in the US and Europe. Now we are getting people from Australia, Japan, and a few other folks too. So the idea is we want to tell this is what the workflows community thinks. And the idea is the program managers would look into that and say, okay, if you are asking, for example, to say, oh, I want to develop a new workflow system or a new workflow capability, are you aligned with what the community is thinking or saying what they need? Or if not, why? So that's our goal. And sorry, it took a lot of time. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Like Rafael's definition of how new workflows come to be, right? We get to a certain point and we think there isn't that widget that I really want, and also it's difficult reading someone's code. I'm going to build my own, and so we've been in that situation as well. Want to open it up now for questions, for observations that you've had perhaps at your own facilities. So. The only thing I ask is that so that everyone can hear you, if you just approach any of the 2 microphones that are right in the center aisle, that would be great, so you'll be heard. Thank you. Just introduce yourself too, maybe, and let us know where you're coming from.
Sure. My name is Chris Gates. I'm from the University of Michigan. I'm going to call you out Thomas first, but you can lateral it if you need to, yeah. So at the University of Michigan, we have some fairly nice institutional storage solutions. But one of the difficulties that we found is that while these are reasonably affordable to individual research labs, these storage solutions, they appear to be somewhat alien to these researchers. They are used to receiving a hard drive. And this is, while it's not more complicated to me, in fact, it's simpler to me, they resist this solution, even though it's probably a better data stewardship solution. Have you experienced anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's never just about the technology, right? It's always about the technology and how to bridge that to the research. I think that's where, as research informatics, we see that a lot is they come with a research question. That's what they're interested in, right? And then what we try to do is to show, okay, well, we've got these tools, we've got these technologies, we've got this special storage. How do we make a match? And it's, yeah, at the start, it's like the change is hard for anyone. So if they've been using like the same system for many years, they know that's what they know, and that's what they trust, right? So it's always a conversation, but I think that once you see the benefits and kind of or can explain the benefits, I think it's an easy enough sell. But yeah, definitely see that all the time.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, one thing that we find is that because we have the benefit of a number of professional staff who aren't on sort of more traditional tenure track, in other words, their incentive is associated with making things work as opposed to just publishing papers. And I say just publishing paper, but it's a different incentive structure, which is really important. So very often when we take on these issues, we have the benefit of being able to embed staff directly into the project who sort of deal with those friction points and can get people over that hump because that's what they do, that's their job. And so having that within the context of a large university system is fantastic and is really, I think, one of the essential ingredients to being able to address these larger sort of workflow problems, because if it's not sort of in your immediate benefit system, whatever that might be, incentive system, it's hard to sort of get over that inertia. Any other questions?
Hi, Drew Jones, Director of Metabolomics, NYU. I was very curious about the example where the people are generating 2 terabytes a second. I'm curious about your thoughts on like long-term data storage, and if you've ever looked at what fraction of the data is really being touched. Just as an example, like we have an instrument that generates about 1 terabyte per data set, but when we look at what we actually use and give, it's less than 1% of the raw data because things get filtered out. Is it really worth saving petabytes of data if they only get looked at once and you use 1% of it?
Well, thinking about that, I think, is the key. I don't know if that works. Not working?
Yeah, I think if you get closer, it is. Yeah, the lights can see that it works.
Does this work?
Yeah.
Okay. Thinking about that, though, from the start is where I think is important. So I don't think there's a universal answer in terms of saving all of the raw data. So in some cases you can get away with not doing that because it's impractical. I guess that's impossible when you're talking about like a petabyte per second. That becomes like a... Is it terabyte? Oh, I heard that petabyte per second.
Oh, I heard petabyte too.
How can goodness? Okay, good. Okay, terabyte per second. But still, it's a fair amount of data. So putting that in your data management plan and thinking about this is important. But I don't think there's a kind of a universal.
I don't think there is either, and this is a question that Broad and other institutes that we hear about have published on. Very often it's the cost of having to recreate versus the cost of having to store, right? That's the basic equation. And in many cases where there are very rare samples, for example, the cost might be very high of trying to recreate those, especially if you're dealing with rare phenomena of some sort. And so it does really need to be looked at, I think, on a case-by-case basis. But there are some parameters, and there's some good publications now coming out about how you might at least frame the problem to consider those issues. But we're getting rid of data now. Another question.
Just
Just
add one more thing. Yeah. At Oak Ridge, unfortunately we cannot put data out. We need to save everything. But what we do is we put on tape, most of them. So what we call cold storage. But it's a lot of tape. Yeah, it is. It's huge. But with what's happening now with AI and all of these things, people come back and say, oh, I need that data from a year ago. So we are developing a new technology that is we call warm storage. So which data we need to keep between these cold storage that nobody touches anymore, but we still have to keep it. And and the hot storage that is like the regular file system thing. It's a hard question.
I was wondering about the data governance committees and who set those up and what their output is? I've heard of a data governance committee at our institution, but it looks like it's being set up by IT and they have a different mindset as like it seems that in your institution you have people coming from different departments and really discussing how to govern this data. And I was wondering how it came about that you established these committees. And the other question would be, what is the output? When you meet and you come to a decision, how many times does that happen? Is it about a specific project or in general?
Yeah, no, great question. So it came about because the challenges associated originally with data were profound in terms of what our research capacity was limited by. And so the recognition that data, again, were incredibly important, and organizing around those was fundamental if we were going to continue to be, we're a $1.2 billion research and development operation at University of Minnesota, and so that there's a lot of research that happens. And so it started off actually very interestingly scoped specifically around data. So we had another name for this committee that we now call ISIG, for Institutional Cyber Infrastructure Group. And what we discovered is that those questions around data actually also touched other aspects of our broader speaking sort of cyber infrastructure, which generally refers to not just the data storage and data elements, but also the compute, network, and people, software, those kind of things. So we wrapped it all under one umbrella. We decided that, again, the middle level was key. We have a lot of people who are sort of the boots on the ground in various departments providing the technology services. And then, of course, we have that upper echelon of various people like the CIO, the Vice President for Research, the Provost who oversees our educational mission. But they don't necessarily know what's actually happening at the ground level. And so this ISIG group are people who typically report directly to, for example, the Provost, or I report to the Vice President for Research. And so our task is to communicate what's happening and what's essential within these various IT silos. And so we scoped it originally so that it was a lead librarian, that it was the Director for Research Computing, and then two other individuals, our main architect for administrative enterprise systems, and then also we have a very large hospital, and so the main IT person within the hospital. And so it was originally those four people. We've added one new member just this last year, and that is the IT director for our College of Science and Engineering. We meet weekly to triage various issues. Quarterly, we give updates to each other in terms of what our technology, what we're doing within our technology. And then we meet annually specifically focused on developing what we call our common goals for that year, what we're going after, our position points. And then we share those with the broader community. But that's how we're structured. There's a lot of what are the products that come out of those. So we've actually consolidated in some cases and created a storage platform that is tape-based. I was operating the tape facility for the University of Minnesota, and that included, in many cases, providing services to our central IT people. That didn't really make sense for me to be doing that, so we rescoped it. We scaled it up, actually, so we got a much larger, much more robust system, and now that's used by everybody at the university. I'm, for example, a client of that. That's one example. I could give you 5 or 6 others, and we have a website, actually, where we talk about our positions and some of the output that we have. But the individual service providers actually do the work. What we do is we converge on who should be doing this, what is the need.
Right.
We just have a minute left. I don't know if any of you want to, if there are any other questions, maybe back to you. Just last minute questions, please.
You guys might need to speak from like a broader sense, because it sounds like you guys are at institutes where you have some pretty high-tech informatics, storage and solutions that you offer your researchers. But speaking more broadly to like academic cores that maybe don't have the same kind of, information technology centers that you do, is it useful for vendors that, are giving the kits to these scientists to generate the NGS data or the spatial genomics data that are generating all these big data sets? Is it helpful for them to offer cloud solutions for whether analysis or storage, or is it preferred that it stays within the university infrastructure?
That's a great question. Thomas, you want to take a crack at it?
Sure.
Because he's been at the center of some of these issues.
Yeah, actually, yes, we've cloud is one of the possible avenues of this. While you were speaking, I was thinking also of national facilities. Actually, a lot of the national facilities actually give an opportunity to individual institutions to participate and use some of these resources. I think that's something that is, I think, is a great asset, nationally. So that's one thing. But
just to mention one while you're on that, would that be access, for example, which would be free if you get an allocation?
Yeah, access.
Yeah,
I was thinking of access. That's an NSF-funded initiative to make a lot of these large supercomputing centers accessible to nationwide. In terms of the vendors, cloud the only problem with cloud is that it's designed to push data and compute there. So if you think about it as a place to put data and then get it back, getting the data back sometimes has a cost associated to it that is not insignificant in the overall picture. So, but it might make sense for some workflows, but overall, there's this caveat in it. That's kind of my.
Yeah, and also, for example, there are things like NSF, it has NSF Cloud Bank, that if you submit a project, and in addition to your budget, you can ask money to go to a cloud, and you need to justify why you need the cloud, and you cannot use like access or other resources. But it's possible. For example, I know folks that NVIDIA just released their cloud recently, and there are folks saying, hey, they have these new versions of these GPUs that I have to explore my research to achieve whatever, X, Y, and Z, and they got additional funds from NSF to pay the usage of the NVIDIA cloud. And I know also that NIH is exploring the same kind of venue. So.
Yeah, the national resources, I think, are a good option to consider. Otherwise, before buying instrumentation, I think that total cost of ownership is sometimes overlooked, and making a case at your institution up front about what those costs might be is pretty important. Otherwise, it can lead to some surprises. Well, that brings us to the end. I want to thank personally our panelists, Rafael and Thomas. Rafael just came in from Oak Ridge today from Tennessee and was surprised by maybe a little bit cooler weather. Thomas, on the other hand, is a local, but I really appreciate your participation in this panel. So thanks to the audience too.
Nice. Okay, I'm getting
Home, you're getting messages. Where the heck are you?
yes, exactly.